According to findings by the Foundation for Investigative Journalism, FIJ, inmates are reportedly trading sex for as little as 5,000 naira and engaging in drug deals simply to survive. Chronic hunger, overcrowding, and absence of basic care have turned our prisons meant for rehabilitation and corrections into spaces of exploitation and despair. Now, these revelations go beyond misconduct. They question the integrity of the justice system itself, with over 75% of inmates still awaiting trial. Incarceration is becoming a silent punishment before conviction. Now, if ignored, these crises could return to society in the form of trauma, hardened criminality, and human rights collapse.
So despite repeated warnings from rights groups and internal reports, the official response remains muted. Budgets are passed yearly, yet inmates remain malnourished, untreated, and invisible. International observers now warn that Nigerian prisons are humanitarian time bombs. The need for urgent reform in feeding, healthcare, and oversight has never been louder. So joining us now is freelance reporter Ayo Oladiran to help us unpack this further. Ayo, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great job, great report, very interesting.
Well done.
I'm wondering what pushed for such an investigation, and what manner of findings did you find? And I have so many questions regarding how this started, how it occurs, whether there's an inclusion of maybe people who work at the prison service as well. What did you find?
Okay, so you mentioned how it started. So at the Foundation for Investigative Journalism, and especially Daniel Ojuku, who I co-authored this report with.
Big shout outs to him.
The prison system has been something that has been of concern to him personally and then to the organization at large. So this report is something that spanned over the course of 4 years. 4 years of data gathering, research, and investigation. And then at the end of the day, we find out that inmates, like you mentioned earlier, are trading sex for 5,000 naira. They are doing ridiculous things just to get feeding and basic amenities because the government is yet to provide standard products for them to use in terms of healthcare, feeding, and other areas of life, basically.
So this is like a survival mechanism that they have come up with. But is there any influence from prison personnel? I'm sorry, Judith. Is there any influence from prison personnel as well? Or is it just strictly an inmate dynamic?
So yes, there's slightly like a little influence from prison personnel because according to our reports, it's a 3-part report, and in documentary, we see that the former Controller General, who is the head of procurement for the NTOS, that's Ismail Adagiri. We see how he awarded contracts to persons who were not going to execute this contract, and he was taking between 20 to 25% for himself. So we can see that this has influenced what the inmates now do and how they act. So yes, there's little influence from the what's it called now, the inmates. There's little influence on the inmates, there's little influence from the NTOS, but generally it's a systemic problem.
A systemic problem. One has to also ask in that systemic problem whether overcrowding is another issue as well. We've seen the pardons by the president just this week of how many inmates, about 900 plus inmates have been released or pardoned. And one has to ask whether overcrowding is part of the issue of lack of resources when it comes to food, amenity, and healthcare.
Yes, overcrowding is one of the major problems. The Nigerian prison system is divided for about 58,000 inmates. Well, as at the time we filed our reports, we had an excess of almost 13,000 inmates. So if we have a budget for 58,000 inmates, which is not even enough considering the 1,270 naira budget per inmate, we are already trying
how much again?
1,270
naira per
inmate per meal?
Per day.
Per day.
So there are 3 meals. We did a breakdown, and per meal they need an average of 1,600 plus to get a proper meal, but they are yet left to survive on 1,270 for a whole day. So there's already an issue with that, and now the fact that it's not even enough to cater for the persons behind bars. Keep in mind that a majority of these persons are still awaiting trial. So there's not enough budget to even go around for those who are already sentenced, not to talk of those who are still awaiting trial.
So it's a judiciary problem at the end of the day, because they're not working hard enough to, clear people out of the correctional facilities. So the anatomy of it, however. What kind of prisons were included in this research? Were they female prisons or male prisons? Does this include both female prisons and male prisons? That's my first question on this.
Okay, majority of what we included in our reports was for male prisons, but like I said, the research spanned over 4 years, so we had input for both male and female prisons.
And for the female, I'm sorry, Judith, but really interested, for the female prisons, was it the same case as well?
Yes.
It was the same case?
It's the same case across board.
So this means there is, I'm sorry again, there is another layer of criminality here, because this is being perpetrated when it comes to the Nigerian look at things when it comes to homosexuality. In the male prisons, this is sex being traded between male inmates. I'm done. I'm done, Judith, sorry.
So beyond sex for survival at this point, one has to talk about the health implications as well, because if we're bringing women into this, what does this mean? What does this say about their health care? Because for survival is food, right? But health itself, like paracetamol, headaches, malaria, open sores, what are we looking at?
Okay, if the investigative series we put out, one of the inmates who spoke to us mentioned how inmates have to buy drugs by themselves. They get some from the medical facilities in the correctional centers, but they have to buy for themselves outside. They have to get from NGOs, churches who visit. Now, for those who cannot afford this, they are left to manage their condition. We reported the case of one person who was in the correctional center for 3 years with a leg injury that was not treated for that 3 years until FIJ took up the story and then reported it and had him released. So it is something that is across board for all of them.
As we're talking about healthcare, let's also talk about one thing now. It just left my head now. Forgive me, but we're talking about drug use as well, right? Mm-hmm. That was also chronicled in your report, and very jarring is seeing those visuals of how tramadol and codeine, as well as the pipe one now, the wrapped ones are also being sold in there. Talk to me about it. How are the correctional officers turning a blind eye to these transactions that are happening inside the prison when it comes to drug use? And what does that danger, the expected danger for society when they're let out?
Okay, for some of these issues, we cannot say the persons in charge of the correctional centers are not aware. They are very aware, but like the Nigerian system, if you have money, you can bypass anything. So for these inmates, most of them use loud, not colos. Apparently, colos is forbidden, but loud is sort of acceptable. So they have like people who help them get it. For them, it's like
what's colos? What's the variation of colos? Is it marijuana and fentanyl, or just?
I'm not really into drugs.
No, I mean, it's just for our viewers, right? Because when I hear colos and loud, is loud marijuana alone? Is
Yes.
colos a complete? Isn't it? Because we don't know what the strain
is
is.
like a combination of more. So it's like usually faster and more effective than the loud. So they allow them use the loud. So they have like, in the reports we mentioned, there's someone who they refer to as Mary Jane, who helps them get this.
That is such a wonderful name. So yeah, marijuana, Mary Jane. Yeah.
Who helps them get these drugs and then they pay. So one of the persons we reported on was being beaten because he said he sent the Mary Jane to get him loud, but they got him colos instead, and then the warden was like, no, you can't bring this in and all of that.
So there is include. I mean, they are included in this tapestry of criminality. The warden here, you are saying, is actually the one who's told no colos but loud. So they are involved.
To a very large extent.
So if they're involved, I also wonder what soliciting for drugs is like at the female correctional centers. But most importantly, is it that the correctional officers are overburdened, or the manpower is less, and so they cannot control the crowd, and so they just let them have a little bit of vices so they can control
maybe it's
better?
just for profits.
I don't know. Maybe you tell us.
It's not the problem of them being overcrowded. Now, it's the fact that they sometimes just turn a blind eye to these things. So they see them happen where they are like, as long as it's not getting out, as long as people are not seeing the effect outside, you can do whatever you want once you pay them the right amount.
But they profit from these exchanges, don't
Definitely, they profit from this and exchange.
Right. So soliciting in female prisons, drug solicitation in female prisons.
It's the
same thing?
Same thing. The Nigerian prison system is such that whatever happens in the male prisons is basically replicated in the female prisons.
Okay. So what are you hoping this research will actually bring to the fore? Are you hoping that there would be some action by the Nigerian government? And how soon do you think this should be?
Definitely, we are looking to see that there's immediate action. First, for the Ministry of Interior, we're hoping that they actually look into these allegations, they look into this drug use, this healthcare, the feeding system, and all of that, and then try to put the policies down on the ground, try to implement them properly. And then there's also, outside the prison system, there's also the issue of the police arresting persons and not charging them properly with enough evidence. So over time, they are still behind bars. They are not being charged. They spend years behind bars. So there's also a need to look into that, which is also as a result of the systemic failure of the judicial system. And then outside that, the Senate Committee on Interior also need to, how do I put it now? They also need to clamp down on the Interior Ministry, ensure that there's a form of checks and balance in what they are doing.
Yeah, that's our problem when it comes to checks and balance. But most importantly, I have to ask about the human rights violations that we're seeing happening there. I think this three-part series is going to reveal that, but more importantly, what's the implication on something, a place that's called correctional centers, right? There's gross violation of human rights going on. Talk to me about that.
So Nigeria says we are operating a correctional center, a correctional system, which is like brought in by the Correctional Act of 2019. But there is still, like one of our stakeholders said, there's still a long gap between policy and implementation. So we have all of this on paper, but we are yet to implement it, which is why the Senate Committee needs to sit down to see that these things are being implemented to the latter.
What's the culpability of this, right? When we look at it at large, when we look at the three-part series, we know that there's still more coming up, and I'm yet to see the documentary, which is soon going to premiere. But we saw a video. Is it out? Sorry, I haven't seen it. But there was a short clip. I don't know, was it Daniel or was it FIJ that posted it? And it was the young men on the floor sitting down, and although they were censored, and I just couldn't watch it. I couldn't listen to it with the audio. I only saw the visuals, and it was enough for me for the entire day. And so I have to talk about the three-part series and who, as we put it out and we're watching the video, who is culpable in all of this crime, and what does this mean, and what do you hope it would achieve at the end of the road?
Okay, I would like to break it down per part.
Please.
So for the first part, we looked into the feeding system. This one is as a result of the Interior Ministry. They need to budget more for inmates. As at 2023, yes, the dogs in the Nigerian Correctional Service were being fed with 800 naira per day, while humans were being fed with 750 naira. So there is a need to budget more for these inmates. We know that it's the correctional center is not a place for relaxation or holiday, but at the same time, they need these basic amenities. They should be provided for them because they do not have the opportunities we have out here to work and get all this money. So the ones that can be provided for them should be provided. And then for the second part, we look into the procurement head, Ismaila Adagiri. We see how he has been awarding contract over the years using his nephew to get this contract. So if you read the story well, you'll see that he would award this contract using his nephew, and then the persons who are willing to pay the 20 to 25% upfront without bidding for the contract, they get to give the nephew the cash, and the nephew takes it to him. So this case was something that the EFCC took up, but there was no conclusion on this thing. We spoke to the Interior Minister. We spoke to him. He said he was going to work on it. They said there were so many actions that were going to be taken, but as of first time, there's nothing that has been done. So that's for the second part. We're hoping that they look into that to see that the right contractors get the right contracts and they implement this, they execute the contract to the latter. And then for the third part, we look into the children who were recently arraigned last year. We see the Bostral homes. We see how we have just 3 functioning in Nigeria, which should be about 1 per state, but now we only have 3 functioning out of the 3 states. So we need to ensure that all of these are also being put in place. States begin to administer all of these things rightly, and then at the end of the day, we should be able to make impact.
I'm very stunned by the details that you're telling. First off, you keep using the word correctional center, and I'm wondering if we have budget for food, budget for this and that. What about the budget for correctional efforts itself? How much of that did you look into? Are people being rehabilitated at these correctional centers, and how much is being spent to do that?
Okay, so yes, we did not exactly look into the budget, but we understand that the correctional centers are doing their best to ensure that these persons are being rehabilitated in terms of learning vocational skills. But now there's a problem. One of the inmates who spoke to us said they learn these skills, they put them to use, but nobody's buying these things off them. So for someone, say someone who is learning shoemaking now, you make all these shoes, but nobody from the outside is getting these things.
Why
so
is there a breakdown?
Why
is there a breakdown? If you're making the shoes and nobody's on the outside to buy it, what's the breakdown in that production and sales? Is it that they're not bringing people in to sell? There's no store for them to sell it from? What's the breakdown there?
There is no means for them to export this now. They cannot go outside to sell.
No.
So there should be a means by which they are able to sell these things. So they say the only times they get to sell is probably when NGOs visit or churches, and then people sit and say, okay, let's just support you. Even if they don't need it, they support. So yes, they are doing their best to an extent. There's still much more that can be done, but as of right now, it's not really effective.
I must say, well done to the team at FIJ. And this is a 4-year process so far. So far, I must ask, have there been any family members of these persons that you have profiled, or the victims of this, sex for survival act and soliciting for drugs and food battle that's going on? Has any other family members, have you reached out to family members of the inmates? What has been their, in this process?
Okay, so there's, for source protection, we cannot exactly, this was one of the reasons why we did not use their real names or their identity. So if we reach out to them, it's going to break that chain.
Very important. Ayo, well done to you and the good guys at FIJ. This is important work, we must say. And we do hope that the right persons are watching and listening, especially EFCC. Yeah. If I get into trouble.
She ends it that way, and she expects me to. But Ayo, thank you once again.
Ayo Oladiran, she's a freelance reporter there with Foundation for Investigative Journalism. Give us a bit of insight following the 3-part series going behind the Nigerian prison to profile sex, soliciting of drugs, and sex for survival trades that the inmates are using across correctional centers, both male and female.